The hum of the gas pump was a lonely sound in the vast, echoing silence of the near-empty gas station. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that stretched and contorted across the cracked asphalt. Birmingham, Alabama, held its breath in the late-night stillness. Danielle Carter watched the numbers on the pump tick upwards, the green glow reflecting in her weary eyes. A long drive, the kind that etched itself into your bones, had brought her here, a purgatory of stale coffee and artificial light. She'd seen 100 such places in her line of work, each one a fleeting stage in a drama only she knew the script to. Tonight, the stage was set for what? She pushed the thought away, focusing on the rhythmic click of the pump handle. There was a single pickup truck parked at the far end of the lot, its darkened windows like closed eyes. Danielle noted it automatically, a habit born of years spent noticing the details others missed. He thought he was untouchable. The phrase, unbidden, echoed in her mind. Untouchable. It was a fragile illusion, one she'd shattered more than once. The thought, however fleeting, tightened a knot in her stomach, a premonition she couldn't quite decipher. The sudden flash of red and blue in her peripheral vision snapped her attention back to the present. A police cruiser, its headlights cutting through the darkness, pulled into the station. Danielle felt a familiar prickle of unease. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but a heightened awareness, a predator's instinct sensing another predator on the prowl. She finished fueling her car, the nozzle clicking off with a metallic sigh. As she replaced the nozzle, she observed the cruiser pull up behind her. Its engine idled, a low growl that reverberated through the stillness. He thought he was untouchable. The phrase returned, a nagging whisper in the back of her mind. Danielle forced herself to breathe evenly, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She screwed the gas cap back on, her fingers tightening around the rough metal. The cruiser door opened, the sound amplified in the quiet. A tall, heavy-set officer emerged, his silhouette outlined against the car's interior light. He strode towards her, his gait confident, bordering on arrogant. He was close enough now that she could see the name tag glinting on his uniform. Henson. He stopped a few feet away, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. "License and registration, ma'am," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any pretense of politeness. Danielle met his gaze, her expression carefully neutral. She saw the flicker of something in his eyes, a glint of power, of unchecked authority. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice calm, even. Her mind raced, calculating her options. She could comply, show her credentials, in this quickly. But something in Henson's demeanor, the way he held himself, the way his eyes lingered on her, made her hesitate. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. He thought he was untouchable. The phrase, now a relentless drumbeat in her thoughts, fueled a growing unease. "Just procedure, ma'am," Henson replied, his tone laced with a subtle edge. He shifted his weight, his hand inching closer to his weapon. "License and registration." Danielle took a slow, measured breath. She could feel the tension radiating off him, a tangible force in the night air. Her instincts screamed at her, urging her to react, to defend herself. But she held back, her training taking over. She needed to assess the situation, understand his motives. She reached into her purse, her movements deliberate, allowing him to see her every action. Instead of her driver's license, she produced her FBI badge, flipping it open with a sharp snap. "Special Agent Carter, FBI," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. The change in Henson's expression was almost imperceptible, a flicker of surprise, quickly masked by a sneer. "FBI, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Well, Agent Carter, around here we do things our way." His hand moved, slowly, deliberately, unholstering his weapon just enough to reveal the gleaming metal. Danielle's heart pounded against her ribs, but her face remained impassive. She knew this game, the dance of power, the subtle shifts in dominance. She had played it before, and she would play it again. This time, the stakes were higher, the stage smaller, the audience non-existent. Except, perhaps, for the silent observer in the darkened pickup truck. "Officer Henson," she said, her voice low and controlled, "I suggest you put your weapon away." The distant wail of sirens sliced through the night, a welcome intrusion into the tense standoff. Henson's eyes widened, a flicker of panic replacing the arrogance. He looked from Danielle to the approaching lights, his face a mask of indecision. Two more police cruisers pulled into the gas station, their headlights illuminating the scene like a spotlight on a stage. Sergeant Collins, a seasoned officer with a weathered face and sharp eyes, emerged from the first cruiser. Officer Jenkins, younger, but with a similar air of competence, followed close behind. They took in the scene instantly. Henson, partially drawn weapon, facing Danielle, her FBI badge still visible in her hand. "Henson, what's going on here?" Sergeant Collins demanded, his voice booming across the lot. Henson stammered, trying to explain, his words tumbling over each other in a torrent of excuses. Danielle remained silent, watching the scene unfold with a detached calm. She knew Sergeant Collins, knew his reputation for fairness and integrity. She let him take control, confident that justice, however delayed, would ultimately prevail. Officer Jenkins moved to Henson's side, his hand resting on his own weapon. "Henson, drop your weapon," Sergeant Collins ordered, his voice hard, unwavering. Henson hesitated, his eyes darting between Collins and Danielle. The illusion of untouchability, so carefully constructed, shattered around him like broken glass. He finally lowered his weapon, the metal clinking against the holster. Sergeant Collins approached him, his face grim. "You're under arrest, Henson," he said, his voice cold, final. He thought he was untouchable. The phrase echoed one last time in Danielle's mind, not as a premonition, but as an epitaph to a fallen illusion. As Henson was led away in handcuffs, Danielle finally allowed herself to breathe. The knot in her stomach loosened, replaced by a weary sense of satisfaction. The night was far from over, but the stage was clear, the drama played out. The silent observer in the pickup truck, its engine now softly humming, pulled out of the gas station and disappeared into the night. The hum of the fluorescent lights above buzzed in Danielle's ears, a monotonous counterpoint to the frantic thumping of her own heart. The gas station, bathed in the sickly yellow glow, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage, the cracked asphalt, its uneven floorboards. She watched the reflection of the approaching police cruiser in the grimy window of the convenience store, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't fear, not exactly, more a prickling awareness, a tightening coil of anticipation in her gut. She'd faced down cartel bosses, stared into the abyss of human depravity, yet this small-town encounter set her nerves on edge. Perhaps it was the sheer banality of the setting, the stark contrast between the ordinary and the potential for something to go terribly wrong. The cruiser door slammed shut, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness of the night. He was walking towards her now, a silhouette against the harsh light, his posture radiating a casual authority that grated on her nerves. Officer Henson. She'd seen him around town, a swagger in his step, a smirk playing on his lips. A predator, she'd thought then, and the instinct hadn't changed. She consciously relaxed her shoulders, forcing her stance into one of easy compliance. Don't react, she told herself. Observe, assess, respond. Her training was a shield, a comforting weight against the creeping unease. He stopped a few feet away, the shadow of his cap obscuring his eyes. The air crackled with an unspoken tension. Danielle could almost taste it, metallic and bitter on her tongue. He rested a hand on his holster, a seemingly nonchalant gesture that screamed of power, of a willingness to use it. The faint click of the leather strap against the gun resonated in the quiet, a silent threat hanging in the air. Her mind raced, calculating escape routes, potential weapons, the likelihood of backup. She registered the subtle shift in his weight, the tightening of his jaw, tiny details that spoke volumes. He was looking for a reaction, a spark to ignite the confrontation he seemed so eager to have. She wouldn't give it to him. "Ma'am, I need to see some ID." His voice was flat, devoid of any pretense of politeness. Danielle's gaze flickered to his hand on his holster, then back to his face. She could feel the pressure building in her chest, a suffocating wave of anger threatening to break through her carefully constructed composure. This wasn't about safety, about procedure. This was about control. "Is there a reason you're asking for my ID?" Her voice was calm, even a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within. She needed to buy time to assess the situation further. He shifted his weight again, the movement almost imperceptible. "You look suspicious," he said, the words dripping with disdain. Suspicious. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was a catch-all, justification for any action he chose to take. Danielle felt a surge of cold fury. She was being targeted, profiled for nothing more than existing in this space in this town. She thought of the mission, the delicate balance she had to maintain. A wrong move here could jeopardize everything. A flicker of headlights in the distance caught her attention. Hope surged through her, a fragile lifeline in the suffocating tension. Backup. It might be hers, it might be his, but it was a change in the dynamic, a shift in the balance of power. She held Henson's gaze, her expression unreadable. "Suspicious how?" She pressed, each word carefully measured, each breath controlled. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. The smell of stale coffee and cheap aftershave wafted from him, an unpleasant intrusion. "Just suspicious," he repeated, his voice laced with a hint of warning. "Now, are you going to cooperate, or are we going to do this the hard way?" The approaching headlights grew brighter, the sound of the engine growing louder. Henson seemed to notice it too, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. He glanced over his shoulder, then back at Danielle, his hand still resting on his holster. The car pulled into the gas station, its headlights illuminating the scene. Two officers emerged, Sergeant Collins and Officer Jenkins. Collins, a seasoned veteran with a weathered face, took in the scene with a practiced eye. His gaze swept over Henson, then settled on Danielle. "Everything all right here, Henson?" Collins' voice was sharp, laced with authority. Henson straightened up, his hand dropping away from his holster. "Just a routine stop, Sergeant," he said, his voice regaining its veneer of professionalism. This individual was acting suspiciously. Danielle remained silent, watching the interplay between the officers. Collins' gaze narrowed, taking in Henson's flushed face, his slightly erratic movements. He turned to Danielle. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" Danielle took a deep breath, the tension slowly easing from her shoulders. She recounted the events calmly, factually, omitting nothing. She saw Jenkins watching her, his expression thoughtful, and a flicker of understanding in Collins' eyes. Henson started to protest, but Collins cut him off with a raised hand. "Henson, step away from the vehicle." His voice was low, dangerous. The color drained from Henson's face. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, his eyes darting between Collins and Danielle. The realization of what was happening seemed to dawn on him, a slow, sickening understanding. "Sergeant, he began, but Collins was already reaching for his handcuffs. Jenkins moved to assist, his movements swift and efficient. The air crackled with a different kind of tension now, the power dynamic shifting irrevocably. Henson's reign of petty tyranny had come to an abrupt, ignominious end. As they led Henson away, Danielle watched, a strange mix of relief and weariness washing over her. The gas station, no longer a stage for confrontation, felt strangely empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing a mournful dirge. The night, however, was far from over. She still had a mission to complete. The fluorescent lights of the gas station buzzed, casting a sickly yellow glow over the cracked asphalt. Danielle Carter watched the reflection of the officer's silhouette ripple in the greasy puddle at her feet. He was closer now, the harsh glare obscuring his features, but the tension radiating from him was palpable. "Control, Carter. Breathe." Her lungs felt tight, the air thick with the cloying sweetness of cheap coffee and the metallic tang of fear she refused to acknowledge. He'd asked for her ID again, his voice a low growl that vibrated in the stillness of the night. This wasn't about a broken taillight anymore. Not that it ever was. Her instincts, honed over years of undercover work, screamed danger. The way he held himself, the subtle shift of his weight, the almost imperceptible twitch of his hand hovering near his holster all pointed to something far more sinister than a routine traffic stop. Her fingers tightened around her steering wheel, the leather cool against her clammy palms. Each breath was a conscious effort, a battle against the rising tide of adrenaline. "License and registration, ma'am," he repeated, the words clipped and sharp like shards of glass. The beam of his flashlight danced across the interior of her car, invasive and accusatory. "Don't react. Don't escalate." The mantra echoed in her mind, a lifeline in the turbulent current of the situation. "I've already provided my license, officer," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor that ran through her. "And as I explained, my registration is in the glove compartment." Every muscle in her body was coiled tight, ready to spring. She could feel the pulse hammering in her throat, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. "You want a reaction? He's looking for an excuse. Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." The command was laced with a thinly veiled threat. The puddle at her feet reflected a sliver of metal, the glint of his partially unholstered weapon. A cold dread washed over her, chilling her to the bone. This wasn't about intimidation anymore. This was about power. The kind of raw, unchecked power that festered in small towns like this, hidden beneath a veneer of folksy charm and neighborly smiles. He enjoys this, she realized, a sickening certainty settling in her stomach. He enjoys the fear, the control. "Officer," she began, her voice carefully modulated, "I understand you're doing your job, but I've cooperated fully. Is there a reason you're escalating this situation?" She met his gaze in the rearview mirror, her expression carefully neutral. Inside, her mind raced, calculating the angles, assessing the risks. The nearest town was miles away, the highway deserted. She was alone, outnumbered and outgunned, but not outmatched. He chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Just following procedure, ma'am. Now, step out of the vehicle." His hand tightened on his holster, the gesture unmistakable. A wave of nausea rolled over her. He's going to do it. He's actually going to do it. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had to act. Now, before it was too late. But what were her options? She couldn't risk a direct confrontation. Not here. Not now. Her only advantage was her training, her ability to think clearly under pressure. "Think, Carter. Think." Just as she was about to make a move, the sound of approaching sirens sliced through the night. Relief washed over her, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. "Back up." The officer stiffened, his hand momentarily freezing on his weapon. The shift in his demeanor was subtle but telling. The arrogance that had oozed from him just moments before evaporated, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He turned towards the approaching lights, his face now illuminated by the flashing red and blue. Two police cruisers screeched to a halt behind her car, their headlights bathing the scene in a harsh, unforgiving light. Two officers emerged, their movements swift and practiced. One, a seasoned sergeant with a weathered face and steely eyes, immediately took in the scene, his gaze lingering on Henson's hand still hovering near his weapon. The other, a younger officer, moved to flank Henson, his hand resting on his own holster. "Henson," the sergeant barked, his voice sharp with authority. "What's going on here?" Henson stammered, his face pale and glistening with sweat. "Just a routine traffic stop, Sergeant. The lady here was giving me some trouble." The sergeant's gaze shifted to Danielle, his expression softening slightly. "Ma'am, is that correct?" Danielle took a deep breath, the tension slowly ebbing away. "Officer Henson stopped me for a broken taillight," she explained, her voice calm and steady. "He then repeatedly asked for my license and registration, which I provided. He then insisted I exit the vehicle, despite my cooperation, and she paused, letting her gaze drift down to Henson's hand, still hovering near his weapon. And he partially unholstered his firearm. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. He turned back to Henson, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Henson, you're under arrest for abuse of power and unlawful detainment. Step away from the vehicle and put your hands behind your back." The younger officer stepped forward, his hand now firmly gripping his own weapon. Henson hesitated for a moment, his face a mixture of disbelief and fear. Then, with a defeated sigh, he slowly raised his hands and turned to face the sergeant, the glint of metal disappearing back into its holster. The clicking of handcuffs echoed in the stillness of the night, a stark counterpoint to the buzzing fluorescent lights and the chirping of crickets in the nearby field. As Henson was led away, Danielle watched, a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over her. The night air, no longer thick with tension, felt cool against her skin. She had survived, and she had won. The hum of the fluorescent lights above buzzed in Danielle's ears, a discordant counterpoint to the frantic thump of her own heart. Henson's hand remained poised near his holstered weapon, the subtle twitch of his fingers a clear message. He's enjoying this, she thought, a cold knot forming in her stomach. He's reveling in this petty display of power. The night air, thick with the cloying sweetness of gasoline and stale coffee, pressed down on her, amplifying the claustrophobia of the deserted gas station. She could feel the rough asphalt beneath her boots, the cold seeping through the thin soles. "Stay calm," she repeated to herself, a mantra against the rising tide of adrenaline. "Stay calm, stay observant, stay alive." "I'm FBI," Danielle stated, her voice steady despite the tremor that ran through her. The small, silver badge flashed in the harsh light as she held it out, a stark contrast to the darkness that seemed to cling to Henson. "Let's not make this any bigger than it needs to be." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken warning. Internally, she calculated the distance to her own concealed weapon, the subtle shift of weight needed to draw it. She hoped it wouldn't come to that. This small-town power trip shouldn't escalate into a life-or-death situation. But the glint in Henson's eyes told a different story. "FBI, huh?" Henson's voice dripped with sarcasm, a sneer twisting his lips. He didn't even glance at the proffered badge, his gaze fixed on Danielle's face, searching for a flicker of fear, a crack in her composure. "You want a reaction," she realized, her mind racing. "He's feeding off this." He took a step closer, the faint scent of stale beer clinging to him. "You think you're so special?" Above the law, his words were laced with a barely concealed menace. Danielle held her ground, her gaze unwavering. "Don't give him what he wants," she told herself, her jaw tightening. "Don't let him see your fear. I'm upholding the law, officer. Unlike you." The words were a calculated risk, a deliberate push to see how far he would go. She needed to understand his motivations, his breaking point. Henson's eyes narrowed, his hand inching closer to his weapon. "You think you could talk to me like that? In my town?" He puffed out his chest, a pathetic display of bravado. The silence that followed was thick with tension, broken only by the distant hum of traffic on the highway. He fumbled for his radio, his fingers clumsy with anger. "Dispatch, I need backup at the Texaco on Route 4. I've got a situation." His voice, strained and high-pitched, betrayed the cracks in his facade. Danielle recognized the signs of a cornered animal, desperate and unpredictable. "He's calling for backup? Why?" The question echoed in her mind. Was it a bluff? A desperate attempt to regain control? Or was he truly delusional enough to believe that his colleagues would support his blatant abuse of power? The sudden wail of sirens cut through the night, growing louder with each passing second. Danielle's heart pounded against her ribs, a mixture of relief and apprehension. Backup, finally. But who were they? Would they be another Henson, another cog in the small-town machine of corruption? Or would they be the lifeline she desperately needed? Two figures emerged from the darkness, the flashing blue and red lights of their patrol car, painting the scene in a surreal, flickering glow. A seasoned officer, his face etched with years of experience, stepped forward, followed by a younger, more hesitant colleague. Sergeant Collins and Officer Jenkins, their name tags glinting in the artificial light. Sergeant Collins' gaze swept over the scene, taking in the tableau of tension. Henson's agitated posture, Danielle's rigid stance, the glint of her badge still held aloft. His eyes, sharp and assessing, lingered on Henson's hand hovering near his weapon. In a heartbeat, the power dynamic shifted. The air, thick with unspoken threats, began to clear. "What's going on here, Henson?" Collins' voice was calm but firm, the authority in it unmistakable. He didn't wait for an answer, his gaze already fixed on the small silver badge in Danielle's hand. He recognized it instantly. Henson, momentarily speechless, blustered. This woman, she's impersonating an FBI agent, resisting arrest." His words lacked conviction, his bravado crumbling under the weight of Collins' gaze. Danielle met Collins' eyes, a silent plea for understanding passing between them. "I'm Special Agent Danielle Carter, FBI," she repeated, her voice gaining strength. "This officer stopped me without cause and has been harassing me since." Officer Jenkins, the younger officer, shifted uneasily, his eyes darting between Henson and Danielle. He could sense the undercurrent of tension, the unspoken accusations hanging in the air. He instinctively sided with his superior, but something about Henson's demeanor, his barely contained rage, made him uneasy. Collins' gaze hardened as he turned back to Henson. "Step away from the vehicle, Henson," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. The subtle click of his own hand near his holster was a clear warning. Henson's face paled, his bravado finally evaporating. He stammered, But she step away from the vehicle," Collins repeated, his voice brooking no argument. He gestured to Jenkins, who moved forward, his hand resting on his own weapon. The realization of his predicament washed over Henson, the color draining from his face. He had miscalculated badly. He had underestimated the woman he had targeted, the silent strength beneath her calm exterior. He had overestimated his own power, his authority in this small town. Henson's hands trembled as he slowly raised them in surrender, the image of his earlier arrogance a stark contrast to his current state of fear. The night air, still thick with the smell of gasoline, now carried the metallic tang of fear and regret. The sirens faded into the distance, replaced by the chirping of crickets, the only witnesses to the quiet unraveling of a man consumed by his own power. The scene was a stark tableau of justice served, the silent gas pumps standing sentinel as the balance of power shifted, leaving Henson exposed in the harsh glare of his own wrongdoing. The red and blue strobing lights sliced through the night, painting the deserted gas station in alternating washes of vibrant color. Relief, sharp and cold, washed over Danielle, a stark contrast to the simmering anger that had coiled in her stomach. Two figures emerged from the patrol car, their silhouettes hardening into the crisp uniforms of Sergeant Collins and Officer Jenkins. Collins, a veteran with a weathered face and eyes that missed nothing, took in the scene instantly, Henson's hand still hovering near his holstered weapon, the tension radiating off Danielle's controlled stance, the fear barely masked in the clerk's wide eyes behind the bulletproof glass. He registered it all, Danielle thought, a flicker of respect igniting within her. He understands. Henson, Collins' voice boomed, cutting through the night with the authority Henson himself had so clumsily tried to wield. "Hands where I can see them." Henson's head snapped towards the approaching officers, a flicker of confusion, then disbelief crossing his face. He opened his mouth, as if to protest, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. Danielle watched, every muscle in her body still taut, as a kaleidoscope of emotions, indignation, fear, and finally, a desperate, cornered panic played across Henson's features. He thought he was untouchable, she thought, the phrase a bitter echo in her mind. Out here, in his small domain, he thought he could operate above the law. "I said, hands where I can see them," Collins repeated, his voice even lower, more dangerous. Officer Jenkins, younger, but with a steely glint in his eyes, moved to flank Henson, his hand resting on his own weapon. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. The subtle shift in power was palpable. Just moments ago, Henson had been the predator, relishing his perceived authority. Now, the hunter had become the hunted. His bravado crumbled, replaced by a trembling uncertainty. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he raised his hands, his fingers splayed wide. "Sergeant, this is a misunderstanding," Henson stammered, his voice cracking with a nervousness he'd been so careful to conceal earlier. He tried to maintain a semblance of dignity, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Collins wasn't buying it. "Step away from the vehicle. Henson," he ordered, his gaze unwavering. He advanced, his movements measured and deliberate, every inch the seasoned law enforcement officer. "Jenkins, cuff him." Jenkins moved with a swift efficiency, snapping the cuffs around Henson's wrists before he could even fully process what was happening. The metallic click resonated in the night, a final punctuation mark on his downfall. The look on Henson's face was a study in disbelief, a stark contrast to the arrogance he'd displayed just minutes ago. He opened his mouth again, but this time no words came out. The realization of his predicament, the sudden, brutal loss of control, seemed to have choked him into silence. Collins turned to Danielle. "Ma'am, are you all right?" His voice, though still firm, held a note of genuine concern. Danielle took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the tension slowly seep out of her. "I'm fine, Sergeant. Thank you." Her voice was steady, but the tremor in her hands betrayed the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Can you tell me what happened here?" Collins asked, pulling out a notepad. As Danielle recounted the events, the disbelief on Jenkins' face deepened. He kept glancing at Henson, shaking his head slightly, as if struggling to reconcile the officer he knew with the man now standing handcuffed before him. He probably never imagined Henson capable of such blatant abuse of power, Danielle mused. Perhaps this will be a wake-up call for him, a reminder that even within the ranks, there are those who operate outside the lines. "He thought he was untouchable," she said, the words escaping her lips before she could stop them. The phrase hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Collins' gaze sharpened. "No one is above the law, ma'am," he said, his voice firm. He looked at Henson, a mixture of disgust and disappointment etched on his face, especially not those sworn to uphold it. As they led Henson away, his head hung low, the bravado completely gone, replaced by a stark, empty despair. Danielle watched him go, the red and blue lights reflecting off the handcuffs, creating a chilling tableau. The gas station, bathed in the flashing colors, seemed to hold its breath, as if witnessing a silent, powerful reckoning. Danielle leaned against her car, the cool metal a comforting presence against her back. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of gasoline, and something that smelled like justice, sharp and clean. She closed her eyes, replaying the events of the night in her mind. The fear, the anger, the careful calculation of her every move, the chilling realization of how easily things could have escalated. But more than anything, she felt a deep, resonating sense of relief. He thought he was untouchable. The phrase echoed again in her mind, but this time it held a different weight. This time, it was a testament to the fact that even in the darkest corners, even when faced with those who abuse their power, a single voice, raised in defiance, can make a difference. It was a reminder that accountability, no matter how delayed, would eventually find its mark. And in that, she found a strength that went beyond the badge she wore, a strength that resonated with the very core of who she was. The fight for justice was never easy, but it was always worth it. That night, under the harsh glare of the gas station lights, Danielle Carter had not only defended herself, but she had also stood up for something bigger, something more profound. She had stood up for the principle that no one, regardless of their position, is above the law.